Church planting can be hard. It can take a lot of time and resources and energy. And today we're talking about 10 things we don't want to see you do that would cause your church plant not to be successful on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I am joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. AJ, welcome to the show. Today we are talking about church planting, which is, I don't know if you know this about me, AJ. You probably do. Oh, because we're friends.
Oh, new information. Awesome. What have you got?
Well, probably not new. Maybe new to the listener, but maybe not new to you. A key focus in my master's program was church planting. So this is like a personal passion. I know we don't talk about it on the podcast much because this is the Church Revitalization Podcast and not the Church Planting Podcast. But I thought it would be good to throw in a discussion about church planting because a couple of relevant pieces here. One, there is a fine line between church planting and church revitalization. If you're small enough, replanting your church really is a lot like planting.
Yeah.
And two, if you are a healthy church and you're growing, you should be planting churches. And so this is good advice. So if you're in a position where you can help a church plant, you should take this advice. So this is relevant no matter where you are on the spectrum. Good advice and helpful things for you to understand about church planting.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I must insert, lest anyone think, Scott, that you and I are not as close off air as we are on air. I did know that about you. I do know and appreciate your church planting experience. So I'm glad.
I knew that you knew I had experience, but I don't know if we'd ever talked about how it was also an academic area of research for me and not just a ministry experience.
Well,
that I have.
It certainly shines through in this article that you've prepared for us this week.
Let's hope so.
Somebody will think
everyone agrees.
Is he Dr. Church Plant? No, he's only Master Church Plant.
Yes, only Master, not Doctor. But let's dive in because we've got 10 deadly church planting mistakes.
We got to keep moving.
Yeah.
So the first one here is not going through an assessment. So a mistake a church planter could make would be not going through an assessment. And Scott, though you're referring here to more so an assessment of the planter himself or herself as to kind of that ideal profile that may make the church plant more successful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important. And if you're in church planting circles, and certainly if you're working with any of the major church planting groups, the North American Mission Board, or you're working with Stadia, or you're working with any of the other bigger names, they're going to require that you go through a church planter assessment, which is good. But if you're kind of an on your own kind of person, or if you're in a replanting situation and you're not thinking of it necessarily as church planting, still recommend that you go through church planter assessment because it's not going to just look at your personality and your skills, although that's really important. It's also going to look at your emotional health, your spiritual health, your family. Nothing is going to put you through the ringer like planting a church. Just tell you the truth. Having been through all that myself, I'll just tell you, it's hard. It's hard work. And if you're not ready for it, it will chew you up and spit you out, more so than any other kind of ministry. And so I would really think it's important for you to go through assessment first.
Yeah, no doubt about it. This is a good practice overall, I think, in leadership, is to look introspectively, at your kind of hardwired personality traits and characteristics and how you relate to people. This is just good for almost any church leader, but especially important for a planter, because a lot of times, sometimes people's hearts may be bigger than their view of the realities in their own personalities and things. And you're going to have to be able to lead a team of people and be able to inspire, encourage, and persevere. And you've got to be prepared to do that. So I think, yeah, this is absolutely a core thing.
Yeah, and a
Number
good part of
two, oh, go
assessment
ahead. Sorry.
too. Sorry, I just want to say before we move on, a good assessment also includes things that have to do with your family.
Mhm.
And the church, I'm not saying this because your wife or your spouse is coming on staff of the church plant. It's precisely because they are not coming on staff of the church plant that you need that assessment, because it's going to impact them directly. And the number of stories that I know anecdotally of, wives that had severe mental health challenges as a result of their husbands planting churches. I'm not blaming anybody in those situations, by the way. I'm simply saying that's why you should be cautious. It is such an intense situation. You really need to be sure that not only are you ready, but that your spouse is ready, because they're likely to get a bunch of criticism, and it's just really hard. It's really tough. You got to be sure you're ready.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think your second point here is very similar, kind of closely related. And that's the second mistake is planting without a coach. So having somebody on the outside that's helping you have probably, I would say, maintain a clear perspective on
Mm-hmm.
what's going on, and walking beside you through this is also just another really key element in making sure that you remain successful, but that you also remain sane, probably to some extent,
Yeah.
cognizant of what's happening. It would be easy to develop blind spots, and that coach can help you kind of see with clear eyes what's really happening around you.
Totally. There's two different functions that happen, that you need as it relates to church planting, getting it off the ground. One is project management, and the second is coaching. They're two different functions, but you need both. So you need someone who functions like in a project manager type role to help make sure, hey, do we have facility lined up, marketing? Do we have, all the equipment that we need? Are we assessing locations? Those kinds of things. Making sure you have all your paperwork together if you're applying for 501c3 nonprofit status, or at least making sure you have your bylaws and constitution done so that you can register that with the state. All of those little detail things. Someone who's a coach doesn't really do that. A project manager does. A coach is working more on you, your character, your leadership, and making sure that you stay healthy. It's possible to have a person that serves in both capacities, but it needs to be clear on the front end that that's what they're doing. They're both being a project manager with you and being your coach. The key thing here is making sure you have a coach, someone who's helping you build into you as a leader and in your character. But this isn't one of the points. You should look at having a project manager. I encourage you to look at, if you're wanting to plant a church, look at Stadia. They're not a sponsor or anything like that, but Stadia is now offering project management services, last I checked, for free, for church planters. Or just, they've shifted their model and they're offering a lot more for free. So check them out if you're looking at planting a church. Might be an option for you.
Yeah, that's really good. Of course, there's lots of denominational resources depending on what your affiliation is, and other
Totally.
planting organizations. So, but if you're more independent, then there are just organizations in which you could pay a nominal fee and be able to get that kind of outside support.
Yep.
So the third deadly church planting mistake today is launching too quickly. And this would probably have some connections back also to personality and character and things like that. I know excitement can overrun that anticipation and that desire to really launch out fast. But it does take a little bit of self-control to some extent to get things organized, begin planning through necessary elements, and taking the time to prepare those before launch.
So true. It takes it takes a minimum 7 months, and maybe up to a year to get everything all together and build your launch team and all these things. And so the analogy I always like to use is it's a little bit like growing a baby. You know, the baby needs 9 months. Now, can the baby be birthed at 7 months? Yes, but it's going to have challenges, right? Like the premature baby is going to have things it has to overcome. So optimally, you want to make sure that you let that church plant baby grow in the womb for 9 months or so.
Yeah, it would be really hard to not just want to run forward on that excitement of this call that you really feel. But yeah, I think you're so right.
Well, there's so many tasks that you have to get done, and so if you're rushing it, you're very likely skipping over some critical tasks. And the challenging part for this, AJ, is people hear stories about like, well, Rick Warren started with a small group in his garage. But you know what? You're not Rick Warren. So, I mean, I'm not trying to be mean, and I'm not trying to say that you couldn't be or that God couldn't do it that way again. It's just you can't take exceptional things and import that. There's a normal way that things happen, and you probably ought to follow those. There's wisdom in it. Like there's reasons why the tasks are set up the way that they are, and you should trust the process.
Yeah, right. Well, even Rick Warren didn't lead without a team, and that is our fourth point. He had people around him that were helping him in that start, and of course now as well. That's quite a large team. But that's our fourth point: is not to be the Lone Ranger church planter and just try to take off running and doing everything yourself. There is such, there's wisdom in desiring a team. There's wisdom then birthed out of the team environment. And so certainly is our encouragement to you to take the time to find that team, to feel like you're surrounded by the right people, and be able to work on this together.
Yes, blessedly, I believe that we are getting away from this. There was a real move, I want to say 10 years ago, where there was this image of the church planter, who is got a Bible in one hand and a cross around his neck, and the guy, this idea of the guy. And I believe that we have learned lessons from that culturally, and have seen the dangers of that. One, in the burnout that it brings to that individual, but also the unhealthy thing it does to that person's ego, to center a whole church around one person and their personality. And so I believe that this is one that's less common, but it's still worth saying. Don't try to do this on your own. Church planting is not a solo sport. It is a team activity. It's a team sport. So be sure that you surround yourself with a team of people that you trust.
Yep. You'll be glad you did. Number 5 mistake is launching too small. So closely related to launching too quickly, and more likely, if you are launching too quickly, you probably are too small. So of course, there's certainly a caution of maybe a flashbang aspect in which maybe an idea gets thrown out there, and all of a sudden there's a lot of people, but that may not be sustainable. And even letting a few weeks or months go by, you might already begin to see people dropping off. So launching too quickly might look big at first, but then it's quickly not. Launching too small is going to lack that critical mass, Scott, to really begin to build into something. It takes a lot of people to begin to form a new church, one that would be sustainable and healthy. And so not having people, this necessary diversity of gifting in place to be able to manage all these different things and build others then up for that increase is it's an area that it could be overlooked if not really considered critically and looking long term.
Yeah, I want to put one sort of asterisk next to this point, and it's this: are you intending to plant a modern Western church, that would be the asterisk. If you are in some country, where you're planting a house church or something like that, the rules are different. But there are a lot of guys who will use that and go, well, if we were planting in China, then this wouldn't be a concern for us. We would just go no matter what size we were. Fine, except my guess is you're not going to operate like a house church in China either. If you want to have children's ministry and you want to have, coffee on Sundays and you want to do worship music on Sunday mornings, with a band or a worship team or something like that. If you want to, if you can't say, oh, well, we can just be like a church plant in China, but then have an expectation that you're going to operate not like a church plant in China.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You have to plan according to what it is that you have in your head. Now, if you're saying, no, we're not going to be that, we are going to be a network of house churches, then by all means, you can readjust, take everything I'm saying with this big grain of salt. But my guess is most guys, nope, they're wanting to plant a church that has children's ministry on Sunday mornings, that, has coffee, that has some music. And so if you're going to plant a church that looks like a Western church, then you cannot launch too small, because you will not have the critical mass that's necessary to sustain those core functions in that approach to doing church. It's the same reason that churches that are in decline, when you get below 50 people, things fall apart really quickly, because you just don't have the critical mass. And so when you're thinking about critical mass and building the team, you need to not think, I just need 50 warm bodies. You need to think, oh, I need 3 people who will work in the nursery. I need a bass player. I need someone who can play acoustic guitar. So don't think of it in terms of a raw number, because you could have 50 people, but if you've got 10 workers and 40 people who are doing nothing, that's not good. When I say launching too small, and I say, hey, you need to have at least 50 people or so, I mean 50 people who have a job and a role and are performing some function. Any less than that, and I have seen this repeated again and again, AJ, churches that launch before they have critical mass are never able to get up above, say, 100 people, and very often close within the first 5 years. So that high closure rate that we see in church plants is very often due to this idea that maybe they have the right number of people on their launch team, but too many of those folks are unemployed as far as it goes with volunteering. Yeah. So I don't want to get stuck on that, but this to me, of all these deadly mistakes, AJ, this might be the most deadly one.
Yeah.
Again, within the context of if you're planting a Western church and have that approach.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, sort of related also, number 6 is if you're relying too heavily on outside funding, that may be a deadly mistake as well. And so much like not having the necessary people in place or even spending the necessary time, not being able to have your financial support at a level internally to be able to be sustainable is also a real potential mistake. So great if you're able to raise, outside funding and have maybe your last church, your home church, or other networks or churches supporting you externally. But you've got to have a plan for moving away from that really as quickly as possible, because that's has a finite existence as is. And so being able to begin to cultivate that giving generosity within your new fledgling congregation is vitally important.
Yeah, that's right. The church that I was involved in planting, we had some seed money that helped purchase equipment, some of our launch costs, roughly $50,000 or so. That helped us get some of that initial equipment. But then beyond that, we were 93% self-supporting from our first Sunday. That was not the plan, but that's what ended up happening. And I think it ended up being a blessing in disguise, because we had to adjust to what we could afford to do. Now, there was some things that we did out in faith, like we launched with 3 full-time staff people, which is insane. And we were able to do that at 93% being self-supporting. So we did those financial constraints did not limit us from taking some steps in faith. But we did have to make some hard decisions and make some adjustments based on the fact that we had very little outside funding. Again, I'm not suggesting that that's a good thing, but we didn't have that crutch to rely on, so we didn't. And my advice would be this: if you have outside funding, view it as a gift, and don't rely too heavily on it. You need to almost do your best to function as if you don't have it, and so that you're not crippled by the reality that it's going away after the second or third year.
Yeah. Very good. Number 7 on the list here of our 10 deadly church planting mistakes is neglecting solid assimilation plans. And so this is one of those really good crossover points from church revitalization and just general church health. And that is having a plan for how you're going to connect people. And even, I mean, that being sort of your initial system and step for a greater discipleship pathway as well. But the newness of that plant is going to wear off for some people in weeks and for others in months. And if they're not able to be connected and begin really finding their way in true discipleship and in true biblical fellowship, then you're probably going to begin seeing those numbers start to drop off. And so it's important to think about this right from the start, Scott.
Yeah, it's underestimated the fact that church plants are exciting. And so there's a little bit of math in this. Okay. So the, whatever you are at launch Sunday, your very first Sunday, statistically, you are likely to be somewhere between 50 to 60% of that by week 2 or 3. Okay. There's a lot of well-wishers who come out or people who are just curious or whatever that first Sunday. And so you can very quickly deceive yourself and go, man, we're really exploding. And then reality sets in within a month or so. What we typically will tell church planters is you want to spend the next, year trying from your launch Sunday, building back up to where you were on your launch Sunday. Hopefully within a year, you can recapture what you lost by natural attrition. So the way to do that is to be sure that you have good assimilation plans in place. You can't assume that the enthusiasm that brings people into the church in the first couple of weeks will sustain you long term. I'll tell you it won't. So it goes back to a good ground game. Are we actually discipling people? Are we connecting with people? Are we following up? Because that newness wears off fast. And if you don't have really good discipleship behind that excitement, you're not going to be able to be a church that's, actually making and maturing disciples long term.
Yeah. This next one, Scott, I think is probably one of the most interesting ones out of the list. And so the point is simply says installing local governance too quickly. It would be a mistake to install local governance too quickly. But what I definitely want to dig into here is the scenario that you've painted, because I think it would be overlooked maybe by a lot of people. And that's that you say in here that toxic people and even toxic leaders would really be attracted to this new and fresh experience at this church plant. And there's certainly a lot of truth in that. We have this very popular article out on our website about why committed Christians stop going to church. And it gets a lot of readership by people who have been hurt in churches and are just disenchanted with hypocrisy and different things. So there is a large audience out there of people that they're just not happy where they were, and they're looking for something new, and they probably will have a lot of baggage with them. And the church plant, unfortunately, could bear the brunt of that. And so kind of back to the main point of this, you have to be very careful about people that might come in hot and really excited, installing them in a leadership area in which, you really haven't gotten to know them deeply enough to know how healthy they are, what perspective they're coming from, and what baggage they're coming out of, to know if that's going to be a good long-term leader or not. So installing local governance at a later date, taking the time to have more external oversight while you really are getting to know each other, because this is a new family that's forming, and that takes time.
Yep. Yeah, you said it. You if this leader is so great, why are they at your church? Now, you can't assume it would be something bad, right? But your first thought should be skepticism. Like, if they're this amazing leader and they're really godly and really, why did they leave? Why are they there with you and not where they were? What happened? There could be a completely.
This would probably be the person who, as soon as you meet them, they're telling you what a great leader they are, how excited they would be to help you lead. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. And so I'll always kind of encourage church planners, give them a job like setting up. Hey, great. I'm so glad you're here. We set up chairs at 7. Love to see you. And if they go, oh, no, my talents would be wasted setting up chairs. I need to be leading a small group, or I need to be, on such and such board or team or whatever. You need to hire me, or whatever it is. Those are all red flags to you. If any task is beneath them, then they're not the person that you want serving on that board. So start with an external oversight board, ideally somewhere between 3 and 5 years. Then you'll actually know who's there, who is qualified. And again, I'm not suggesting that someone who's new to your church can't have a completely legitimate reason for not being where they were. They absolutely could, but you should be skeptical. That you should first be skeptical and get to know them, let them earn some trust before you put anybody in local governance.
Yep.
The exception to this maybe would be, AJ, I feel like the asterisk here. If you're like a church that's being planted from another church.
Yeah, and they're sending leaders.
They are sending, that would be different. I'm talking about brand new church start, not directly linked to another church. That would be, in that situation, you want to wait.
Right. Yeah. Not the person that just shows up early on and they've got a wake of broken churches behind them.
Correct. You got it.
All right. Number 9, mistake, waiting too long to implement a leadership pipeline. And this is another key crossover from church revitalization and healthy churches in general. And that's having a system and a process for managing, developing, launching, training, evaluating leaders at every level in the church. It's and I know this is near and dear to your heart, especially, Scott. And I think probably out of this list, maybe one of the more overlooked things in church plants, because it's not on the radar of a lot of leaders on how they're going to continue to build up other leaders.
Yeah, it's the one that got us. Now, the church plant that I was involved in still exists. It didn't close, so I guess it wasn't deadly, but went through a real rough patch. So this is just me being transparent. I'm fine with that. One of the reasons that I left, there were several, but one of the reasons that I left, and I was in the number 2 chair. I feel like I should say that. I was not the lead planter. I was the second chair leader. One of the reasons that I left was burnout, and some of my frustrations around leadership development and the lack of leadership development that we were doing. We grew really quickly as a result of moving facilities, and we didn't have a pipeline in place, and it was burning out our leaders, and it was burning me out. And so that caused other problems. That burnout caused other problems that also contributed to me leaving. So don't overlook this one. I suffered the consequences of this particular mistake. Do not do it. You want to create the structure on the front end, and it can scale with you, because it's about having principles, systems, structures in place. And it may feel silly when you're first putting them in place, because you're like, we're small, we don't need this. But you'll be thankful that you have these processes in place as you grow, because it grows with you. Before we move on to our last point, feel like it's worth just to close the loop on my own experience. That church is actually doing really well. Like they're in a new season. So that's a testament to God's grace. So even though we've titled this 10 deadly church planting mistakes, really God can work through anything. So even if you commit one of these mistakes, and they can be deadly, certainly they're costly. So that's why we want to avoid them. But I'm thankful that God is continuing to use the church that I was a part of planting.
Well, much like the human body individually, Scott, the body of Christ can take a pretty good wound and heal and continue on with a long and healthy life. So
totally.
All right. Our 10th and final deadly church planting mistake, neglecting the process of strategic planning. Again, I think much like number 9, this is an often overlooked piece, especially, I mean, lots of churches, we think every church should engage in strategic planning, but church plants are almost they have this even more, this sense of like this Holy Spirit driven, like, out of body experience of God just really moving powerfully. And that's all true, but it can sometimes feel, like it shouldn't even be dealing with strategic planning. And a lot of people feel this way, just the church in general, like, oh, we need to let God move. And no, we can't make those kinds of plans. Well, God's a very strategic God. And he's has a history of putting people in places and helping them to make plans. And so this is certainly one of those areas, but planning things out for the future. How will we structure ministries? How are we going to disciple people? How are we going to build leaders? As we said in the last point, down to all the smallest details that you're going to plan anyway. I mean, you're going to plan how you're going to conduct your Sunday services. You're going to plan lots of things. So this is a more broad church health planning. And it's as valid 100% for church planting as it is for church revitalization and just every other church that wants to be healthy and sustainable.
Here's how it's different for church plants. Church plants have to be strategic at the beginning because they don't exist. So you have to sit down and ask the questions. What's Sunday morning going to look like? How are we going to do discipleship? What are we going to do in terms of outreach or evangelism? So they start strategic because they have to, because they don't exist. You have to create the plan. The mistake that church plants make that is unique to church plants, in a sense, is that they are unlikely, especially if they have any measure of success early on. They'll go, oh, that plan's working. So they'll just milk the plan that they made at the beginning. A church plant that's struggling will continue to iterate on its plans. That's a good thing. But a church plant that sees success will look at what it did and go, no need to keep planning. And that's just not true. And if you have some success, you need to be sure you don't rest on your laurels, and that you actually continue to grow, develop, innovate, and make plans for the future. And so that's the mistake. That's the deadly mistake, is that a church, particularly one that sees success early on, thinks it doesn't need to keep planning, rather than recognizing that one of the reasons why it succeeded was because it had good planning. So you got to lean into that need to keep planning.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, this was a great list. Thanks for sticking with us through 10 deadly church planting mistakes. But you know what? Even we recognize our audience is primarily those interested in church revitalization. We would love nothing more for your church to be so healthy and growing that you would take on the responsibility of planting more churches in and around your area. And so I hope there are a lot of you listening today that have had that sense that wouldn't it be awesome if we could begin to replicate ourselves, or that's part of your future vision. So I hope today was especially maybe even inspirational, that you'd be thinking, these revitalization guys for some reason today talked about planting, and maybe that's part of a word that you were needing to hear, that would be part of the future vision for your church. I think that would be awesome, don't you, Scott?
Yes, thank you, audience and AJ, for indulging my passion for church planting. I thought, let's just do one episode on this. I would love it, if you're listening to this episode, flood our email inbox, leadership@malfersgroup.com. Put a whole bunch of comments and say how much you love that we talked about church planting, so that I can convince AJ that it need not be 2 more whole years before we discuss the topic again.
Wow, sounds like Scott's attempting to launch out on his own now in a church planting consultancy, and he's trying to use you to help make that happen. But
not at all. I do just love this topic very, very much. And so I'm glad to have spent some time talking about it. And you can read the article that we've been referencing at malfersgroup.com/108, malfersgroup.com/108. And we have some team discussions, questions down in the description below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're not watching on YouTube, we'd love for you to check it out. Hit that subscribe button and, join the YouTube squad, seeing our beautiful faces. Also, if you're listening, ring that bell. If you're listening, please give us a review. Give us a 5-star review. Helps us get seen by more people as they are looking for church leadership and church revitalization content on their devices. Thanks for that. Thanks for helping us out.
That would be great. Thanks for being with us again on the Church Revitalization Podcast. We'll see you next time.